Shortly after September 11th, Garrison Keillor told this Lake Wobegon story, and I have kept it wadded up between my cheek and my gums for all these years, worrying it into a little knot. When things are hard, he begins, why make them harder? When things are hard, why make them harder? It's what Mr. Halverson up at the high school asked David Tolerud about a week and a half ago. Why make things harder? David Tolerud was a boy who didn't want to wear a yellow ribbon. There was a big rally in support of the troops at school. It was very moving. David didn't take one. He was the only one who didn't. He didn't know that until later. He was walking in the hall and everybody was looking at him. He was standing in line in the lunchroom. People were staring at him. Nobody wanted to talk to him. He got his tray of macaroni and cheese and he went and sat down at the table where he always sits with his friends, and they looked as if they'd rather that he hadn't. He came to school the next day and there were notes in his locker. Not very nice. He went through the cafeteria line, and when he came to go sit down, nobody was sitting at his table that he always sits at. So he sat there alone. And that was when Mr. Halverson called him into the office and said, why are you doing this? And David said, I don't know. I just don't want to wear one. He said, well, that's your perfect right, of course. You have a right to do whatever you want, but this is upsetting a lot of people. It's disrupting classes, and I'm going to have to suspend you. David said, that's not fair. He said, I know it's not, but that's how it is. Okay, he said, I'll wear one. So he put it on, which was the right thing to do. To give in to superior force is not dumb. We always learn something from it, and what this boy learned from this at the age of 16 is that Lake Wobegon is not his home, and this will save him time, and it will sharpen his interest in geography. I was new to listening to NPR when this story aired. I was not expecting that twist at the end, which was not a twist at all. It was, as they say, not prescriptive, but descriptive. But the moment it describes has come to me often since in my life, in my work with immigration. That moment of utter devastation, and it is devastation, that immediately cycles to something else, not acceptance. Never acceptance, but acceptance of the reality of it. This is my reality, not fair, but this is how it is. And I'm grateful to Garrison Keillor for helping me to see that this desolation, see what I did there? Desolation? This anguish, it's sometimes a gift. It is the gift of this is not your home. You're not safe. And it is a gift. It does save you time, and it does sharpen your focus. The last meaningful legalization program this country ever had sunsetted on April 30th, 2001. This is a date all immigration lawyers and a certain set of immigrants know by heart, April 30th, 2001. It was the last day of the Legal Immigration Family Equity Act, the LIFE Act. The LIFE Act made it so that if you had everything else in place to be sponsored for a green card for permanent residence by an employer, a member of your family, and your one barrier, your one deal breaker was that you came without papers, then you could pay a fine and be forgiven for that one deal breaker. This was a simple, elegant solution to a persistent problem, a market-based solution. You entered the country the wrong way. Okay, you did damage. How do I make up for that damage? You pay this fine. Okay, now you're back at zero. Now you can go for your green card. Simple, elegant. But it still functioned within a backlog system. So if my US citizen father filed for me, his adult child, in 1995, I just looked this up yesterday, I know these numbers are right. If I'm from a country with a separate quota like Mexico, I am still waiting for my chance to get a green card through this program, and I cannot leave the country or I lose the protection. So there are people, real people, I talk to them all the time, who've remained in the US because they were promised a green card so long as they keep their nose clean and don't leave, who will still be waiting a decade from now, and meanwhile they have no papers whatsoever. And these people have just become accustomed to waiting, keeping their heads down, working, making what family connections they can without being able to make too many promises, paying into a system they can't collect on, because it serves the interests of the powers that be to keep them here, but not here. In my entire career as a professional, despite all of our tough talk and all of our conciliatory talk, there's never been any political will to do systematically either deport them nor to systematically legalize them. They are our country's demi-monde, our persistent underclass. In our popular culture, they're the people we threaten to call la migra on if they don't do what we want. Right, on the cop shows? We're always calling la migra on these people. In the movie Crossing Over, which I recommend, and not just because the part of the feisty immigration lawyer is played by Ashley Judd, although that's good reason. A teen presents a paper at school promoting the idea that people should try to understand the 9/11 hijackers. The school principal, shocked, reports this to the authorities. It's not a crime. She's not charged. But because of the scrutiny, it comes out that her parents and she are here illegally. ICE eventually works it out so that her father can stay with the girl's two younger US-born siblings, but she has to leave with her mother to Bangladesh, even though she hasn't lived there since she was 3. And I know that's fiction, but it comports with my reality. Often when we're proposing to do something for a client, they'll ask me, is it safe? Am I safe? Like when DACA came out, the program for the Dreamers, the students, there was this hesitation. I heard they were making a list of everybody that applies, and am I safe? And another kind of lawyer, one who says, sign here and here, and don't worry your pretty little head, I've got this, might say, oh yeah, totally safe. Right? But the real answer so often is, are you safe? You never were. And you still aren't. And we can talk about what we can do about that, but you will never hear those words come out of my mouth. I'm not going to talk about safe. Those aren't the right words. And when we elected a man who drops departmental policy by executive order at the end of Friday night's news cycle, banning whole nations of people overnight while their planes are in the air, my clients were clamoring to see me. What does this mean? What does it portend? Am I safe? The answer was the same. You never were. And you still aren't. And this is the gift. Knowing that you're not safe is the gift. And here's what it gives you. The knowledge that power will concede nothing without demand. For months during the election season, if you'd asked me what it felt like on the ground, I might have said, tentative hope? I might have said anxiety. And after the election, I might have said desperation, pessimism. But lately I'm seeing something I haven't seen in a long time. Steely resolve. I'm seeing what Yeats saw in his compatriots in the Easter uprising. I thought that they and I but lived where motley is worn, but all has changed. Steely resolved, changed utterly. A terrible beauty is born. Now, round about the same time as Garrison Keillor was spinning this yarn and planting that seed in my brain, a group of organizers in New York created a coalition of detainees and others facing deportation. It was called Families for Freedom. Now, this was John Ashcroft's America, Chris Kobach's America, remember, and Arab and Middle Eastern men were subjected to what was called the National Security Entry-Exit System, NSEERS, a series of hackneyed and alienating measures aimed at what would later be called extreme vetting. This was kind of an early iteration. This was a time when an adjudicator would pause in the middle of a marriage interview between two Jordanians and ask them if they knew where Osama bin Laden was hiding, or where the supposedly heightened background checks of Muslim names would result in delays of 2 years or more, while some poor intern hand-checked all the possible spellings of Muhammad. There were many groups and coalitions that sprang up during this time, and the only reason I single out Families for Freedom is that Families for Freedom were especially clever at making the government lawyers act like, lawyers, which is to say not drones, but professionals with discretion and judgment when to prosecute and when to hold off, and they were especially bold in asking for a particular instrument of discretion from the very back of the rack, very seldom used, called deferred action. By the time Subhash Katil, that's him there, of Families for Freedom had moved to Miami to organize for the Florida Immigration Coalition, the idea of deferred action had been workshopped into a policy initiative. And the private attorneys who supposedly knew so much, myself included, we laughed it off. We thought, yeah, sure. For a really extraordinary situation, sure, but you can't give deferred action to a whole class of people. Impossible. And in 2009, when members of that Florida coalition decided to walk 1,500 miles from Miami to D.C. in what was billed as the Trail of Dreams, the old hands like myself, who supposedly know so much, laughed it off and said, must be all those Cubans in Florida, you think people care. But they met with senior White House staff and got the ear of Senators Durbin and Lugar, who then became champions of the DREAM Act. And in 2010, when the DREAM Act failed to gain traction, that confirmed all of the suspicion of the old guard like myself. But it gave rise to the youth-led United We Dream network, whose End Our Pain campaign was a powerful counter-narrative to the Obama administration's assertions that they were taking special care with students and youth. And that action led to a departmental memo setting out a set of priorities that would potentially end the deportation of low-priority individuals, people who didn't have any criminal, people who'd been brought here as children, etc., like the Dreamers. And in 2012, with Obama standing for re-election, the Dreamers dogged him on the campaign trail. And California's National Day Laborers Organizing Network and UCLA Law's Hiroshi Motomura got law professors on board. They got 100 law professors to write affirming Obama's power to act without Congress, and they had given up on Congress. And the old guard said, it's California. They don't know who their friends are. Maybe Rubio will get somewhere with this supposedly bipartisan DREAM Act of his, but no way can this be done by executive order. And when a couple of dreamers from the National Immigration Youth Alliance held a sit-in inside the Denver Office of Organizing for Action, the old guard really threw up their hands and said sit-ins and hunger strikes really are, that's a bridge too far. These youth need to be targeted and strategic and circumspect, like us. But with the threat of more hunger strikes looming, Obama signed the executive order, granting DACA. And now over 700,000 young people have work permits and Social Security numbers and driver's licenses, and it happened in complete contravention of the accumulated wisdom of the careerists and old guard like myself. And we stood in complete astonishment and then took credit for it. But it was really the boldness and creativity of people who knew that they weren't safe, who took that gift, and that power concedes nothing without demand.